Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm reviewing the first season of the anime series, The Seven Deadly Sins. I kind of ended up watching this show on impulse, just kind of screwing around on Netflix, and kind of said to myself, you know what, I'm kind of in the mood to watch some anime. So I sort of flipped through, just seeing what was available. Spotted the Seven Deadly Sins. I thought, well, I read a few volumes of the manga a while back, and I thought it was reasonably decent. So I'm like, you know what? I've got some free time today. Why don't I just give this a few episodes and see how I feel about it? Now I remember when I had read the manga some time back. I thought, well, it's all right. It's nothing super fancy, but it certainly was decent. But as the ball got rolling on the anime, I got to liking it more and more. And by the end of the season, I was pretty impressed. I mean, it's genuinely a good series. Now it's very much a lot of it is very standard shonen drama stuff. Lots of fighting, people calling out attacks, and all of that. And well, criticizing the show for that would be sort of like criticizing action movies for having people punching each other and shooting guns. What sets a series like this apart is that, like, for example, Bleach and Naruto and One Piece, kind of, sort of the grand trinity of that sort of genre, is that they take the genre and they really infuse it with, good character development. Lots of people in, for example, Naruto and particularly One Piece, have like the main characters all have these really terrible and extremely tragic backstories. Um, and you might not be able to tell, I'm kind of a fan of One Piece, and like Naruto, I have like Naruto watched quite a bit of Bleach. Kind of got burned out on that one though. But anyway, and the Seven Deadly Sins does fall into that category. They do, of course, do the typical things for the genre, but as the series goes along, you kind of get to know the characters better. Their backstories are more fleshed out, and it really does really bring the service. I mean, sorry, it does elevate this series above others of the genre. So while it's certainly probably not going to go down as one of the all-time greats or one of the all-time classics, it's still a very enjoyable series that does what it does quite well. And there are several things that I think really are kind of going for the series. Kind of set in fantasy world, which is kind of a big thing right now. It does have the advantage of not in some way involving a bunch of Japanese people playing an MMO. Oh, and in fact, the world it's set in is a place called Britannia, which, if you know anything about British history or anything like that, what you're kind of seeing in this series is, well, they've obviously cribbed some names here and there, like if you're like familiar with like the origin of the name Meliodas and such, and what's that one dude Growther? Yeah, but it's still kind of its own thing. And I do have to give the series credit. The Seven Deadly Sins themselves, although in all fairness, we only ever actually get to meet six of them. But to be completely fair, from what I understand, the seventh sin is at this even in Japan at this point only like a manga only character. That took quite a while to get around to introducing that character. But as I was saying, they really do a nice job of doing stuff with the characters when you kind of find out their origins and where they came from and things like that about them. It really does make them very rich and very enjoyable characters. My personal favorite ended up being King, just because you learn his story and what's going on with him and everything that's happened to him. It's like, man, this dude's had it rough, you know. And there's that's a similar situation with Bond. You look at him, and he's this sort of cocky, well-muscled dude with silver hair who looks like basically kind of like a million other characters you see in shonen manga. But you actually get into his backstory and what's motivating him. It's another example of like, man, this guy's had some real tragedy in his past, and that puts him in more than once some very interesting positions. And that's the true for the other characters in there. We don't quite get them as fleshed out as I was like. Like my second favorite character in the series is probably Deanne, and I really wish we'd had the chance to learn a little bit more about where she came from and what her deal was. But from what I understand, that's probably going to get fleshed. That is fleshed out in the manga better. And it's also kind of a nice series where, in general, the main characters are generally rather positive people. They're people who, definitely have their reasons to be upset about the world, but for the most part, they kind of go about things in a rather jolly fashion. That's kind of one of the things that I always liked about One Piece is that despite all the, really terrible tragedies in the past of the main characters, by and large, they're rather positive people. And one thing you can kind of always count on for One Piece is that at the end of a major arc, the characters are going to kick back, kind of have a party, and there's going to be a lot of showing of them celebrating with the new friends they've made along in that particular adventure. And there is something similar here, where after the events of a little character story arc within the series, you will usually see the characters just kind of kicking back, having some drinks, having a little party, just being happy and enjoying each other's company. And in these cynical days, just something genuinely happy um, really does strike home. I think. Now, well, of course, this being a first season, and there are, of course, also being a lot of things going on in the manga that haven't been translated to the series yet, it does sort of lead to some shortcomings. Like, for example, one of the principal characters, the leader of the Seven Deadly Sins, Meliodas. Well, you kind of by the end of the first season, you have at least some idea of what this guy's deal is, but there's just so much about like what's going on with this guy's past. Who is he? Why is he doing all of this? Why doesn't he look anything at all like his wanted poster? You just sort of like, I really wish we could have gotten a little bit more about what's going on with this guy up front so that I could get a better read on him. But nonetheless, despite those things, he's still a very likable and enjoyable character and makes for a good lead for this. In fact, really, the only character who that I think is a bit on the weak is Elizabeth, and she is kind of another one of the linchpins of the series. The characters do sort of orbit around her and even Meliodas, and her desire to help restore the kingdom and all of this other stuff is sort of central to what's going on here. But she herself, it's not that she's not a likable character. It's just, well, as TV trope puts it, there's a character trope called the load, and for the most part, that's often what she's doing. She's doesn't really bring a whole lot of useful skills to the table, and constantly is like, I'm going to run into this combat situation, even though I have nothing I could possibly contribute to that. But her genuinely caring about other people, her desire to help others, and all of that, being the heart. I mean, that is legitimately what her contribution is. And what I do like about it is that by the end of the season, they have kind of brought up some stuff with her that is very interesting and shows that there's a lot more to her than is previously going on. And in fact, it kind of reminds me a lot, if you've ever played the original Final Fantasy X, of the character Yuna. First you first meet her, she strikes you as somebody who's a nice person with a good heart, but a bit of a milksop. Not exactly somebody with a whole lot of spine. And as time goes by, you realize that yes, in general, you're dealing with somebody who is a bit of a soft-spoken person, but when push comes to shove, is in fact somebody of incredible will and incredible bravery. And there's that moment in Final Fantasy X, which is one of my all-time favorite moments in video games, where Yuna kind of has to stand up to the high priest of the religion that she was raised in, and all of her friends just immediately cluster around her, and I just absolutely love that moment. That's the moment for me in the game where I really realized what an amazing character Yuno was. And that also, in a lot of ways, was a moment that really kind of made me realize something about strong characters, about how it's very narrow-minded and even foolish to just sort of assume that the ability, to beat people's asses is all there is to being a strong character. No, it's really about being a rich character, having these facets, having character growth. And to bring it back around to this series, that's something that this series, this show does have. As you learn about these characters' backstories, as you see them go through the various ordeals and trials, that you do see that happen to them. And this is also nicely extended to the secondary characters. There's a lot of knights who are part of, the holy knights who are a big deal of protecting this kingdom, and at times they serve as both as helpers and as antagonists to the main characters. And they also do take the time in the series to sort of flesh out a little bit what's going on with some of these people. And I really did I like that a lot. I particularly ended up liking the characters like Gila and Jericho. A little disappointed that Gila's name ended up not being spelled Gila, because that reminds me of Gila monsters, which, if you've never heard of them, are these type of like lizards, big ass lizards, kind of like iguanas that live out in places like Arizona. They're harmless, but there were like these like urban legends that they're poisonous. They're not really, but yeah, I just kind of remember. I just kind of are oddly fond of them because they were mentioned on an episode of Reading Rainbow from when I was a kid. Gila monsters meet you at the airport. Okay, I'm just completely rambling about stuff that if you born a kid back in like the 80s is going to make absolutely no sense to you. So I'm just going to put that aside. But anyway, so good character stuff. Animation, no, I don't really have a huge amount of stuff to complain about. Although, if you really pay attention, you can see that there are times when like characters in the background are really, really poorly drawn. Like there's this little tournament episode, the tournament that goes on for a couple of episodes. And if you really look carefully in the background, the people who are meant to be extras are drawn like absolute crap. I mean, seriously, it's sort of like seriously, did somebody cheaped out on that? There's just no way of getting around that. But that aside, for the most part, the series does look pretty good. I mean, you can definitely see the Akira Toriyama influence in these characters, but I mean, really, that would be like complaining that Jack like comic book artists are influenced by Jack Kirby, or perhaps like Frank Miller or Jim Lee. I mean, it's just like, well, yeah, of course they're going to be influenced by their some of the legendary artists of their genre of their medium. So again, you can't really complain about that too much. Music, I will say this: I really, really liked the second opening theme song. It's called "Man on a Mission," and it's a very enjoyable song. I found myself sort of hunting it up on YouTube and just kind of kicking back and listening to it a few times. And I think that kind of covers everything I had to say about this. Oh, one thing I did want to mention. Uh, this is something I'd seen before, and just kind of looking at the series reminded me. It's the name of the show in Japanese, which is Nanatsu no Taizai. Taizai, of course, is Japanese for the seven deadly sins, but um, they don't use the word deadly. In fact, they use the kanji, which here would be read as tai, which means big or great. So if I were to personally translate that back into English, I would say it would be more like the seven great sins. It does not use the word deadly. In fact, I actually, because I don't remember if I ever knew that word in Japanese or if I'd just forgotten it, but I looked it up and it's something completely different. So it's just one of those things that I mean, I understand why they do this. Sometimes you don't always want to be super literal here. Like calling them the seven great sins makes perfect sense if you're dealing with this in explains an idea to Japanese people. It's just if you sort of think about this as being the word great rather than deadly, then the idea of portraying characters who are called the seven deadly sins in a heroic light, it makes a little bit more sense. Um, yeah. So that's just one of the things that struck me about this series. Anyway, I think I've rambled on about this enough. So at the end of the day, Seven Deadly Sins. Well, it certainly doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it's an above-average shonen genre series that I enjoyed quite a bit, and I believe there's a season 2 for this in the works, and I would certainly be looking forward to it. With that said, I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.